there were these standards, again, as we established last time, most of these standards ended up affecting the women more than the men, right? One was women were not supposed, they were supposed to be very conscious of where their purse strap went, and it could not go between the boobies, okay? Because if it goes between the boobies, it really emphasizes those boobies, and those men are just gonna go fucking crazy, oh, boobies. And then also they had to be very conscious of where their seatbelt. If you get into a car with a man and you're putting on your seatbelt, don't put the strap in between your boobies because one of those tits is gonna pop up and be very visible. I don't know where you were supposed to put it because if you put it below it, both of the boobies come up. If you put it above it, I think you'll choke in an accident. This is horrible advice. We needed a 5-point harness. What we needed is a Christian 5-point harness for women there was like a built-in brassiere that just covered the boobs, kept everything in place, nothing's jiggling, nobody's stumbling.
A baby seat.
We could have sold that. I wish I could go back in time and sell an upgrade 5-point harness for women riding in cars with Christian men.
You're talking about Christian women in baby seats, but really what you're,
I'm just talking about a harness.
Is that
a harness.
The teaching was that
men are animals.
The men are the animal babies. Like they're the ones who need to be, you've got to make these decisions to protect them from themselves, but to keep them from stumbling is the phrase.
Yeah. That
is in the Bible, I guess.
Probably.
You don't want to cause your Christian brother to stumble, so don't put the strap in between your boobaloobs.
So again,
so it became the women's responsibility to protect the men from themselves.
But the one thing I will say is if you start with a worldview where people are basically bad, people are basically evil, people are basically carnal, and and sex outside of a heterosexual monogamous marriage is always wrong. That is the only context. You see how these standards get put on top of that to keep you from the sin, right? I'm not saying it's right, I'm just saying it's logical if that's where you start. I don't start there anymore, so it all seems crazy to me. And if you don't have that standard as well, it all seems crazy. And the reality is that because people are naturally sexually active and people gonna screw, right? It happens. And because that's the way people's bodies work, that doesn't mean just let it all hang out and there's no standards at all. But I'm saying that when you tamp down to this degree, you end up damaging people in ways that you end up finding out later in life exactly what that damage was. You begin to wake up and realize, oh, that was very damaging. What we were doing, especially to those women, especially to anyone who was struggling with anything except a very specific heterosexual attraction.
Yeah.
The damage that was being done to all those people was just, it wasn't even on the radar. We weren't thinking about what we were doing. We thought we're keeping people from having sex outside of marriage, and so this must be good. But it was creating this, for us, it was just like, we heard about pastors who would have standards like, I don't get on an elevator with a woman. I do not ever let a woman into my office. I would never have a woman in my office and close the door.
Without somebody else being
And then
there.
you're like, and at the time you're like, this is good. Yes, this guy understands that he understands the standard and he's making the good, smart moves. But there's a whole bunch of stuff that's wrapped up in that. One of the things you're doing is you're saying that you can't trust yourself, that being alone with a woman in an elevator, the only option, or maybe we can just learn to control ourselves. And also, what about the woman? She's there too. She has the ability to say yes or no. She has a will of her own, and you're treating her like every scenario is just set up like the woman is this object of desire, and that all that she can do is either increase your sexual attraction to her or increase the risk that you're going to have around her. And you are an animal and you've got to keep yourself in a cage. Whereas what would it be like to be like, maybe I'll try to ride on an elevator with a woman and see what happens. Maybe I can get to the 7th floor without, making out with her. Come on, think about what you're saying about yourself.
We had this belief that you couldn't be friends we couldn't be friends with a girl, really. I mean, we grew up with friends who were girls, but then like we kind of distanced ourselves over time, and especially if you dated somebody and then afterward, and this is complicated, maybe off topic, but like we definitely had this belief that like you can never be friends with them afterwards, like because there's too much, everything is sexually charged.
Right.
And again, I feel like it's just not coming to grips with the reality of what was happening from a biological standpoint, that it got to this point very quickly, and like a sponge, I soaked it up because I wanted that system. When it came to masturbation, we didn't want, as guys we would talk about it, but you know, I don't know that the girls were talking about it. I did not believe that any girl masturbated.
Or looked at porn.
We
believe that they just did not do that.
And because it was the guys who had to be controlled and protected from themselves. And so that was kind of the message I got, was that, and girls aren't into sex.
And that was the message that the women were getting as well, by the way. So the ones that were masturbating, which is probably all of them, you know, what were they feeling like at the time? It's like, it doesn't seem like anybody, I mean, the boys are talking about masturbation all the time. They go to these conferences and they talk about porn and masturbation. Well, I'm interested in those things too, but I guess I'm weird because we're not talking about it. We're just talking about purity rings.
Right, yeah, the guys didn't get a purity ring, and the guys didn't go to a dance with their mom and promise to their mom at a dance that they weren't gonna have sex
don't get
with
me
anyone
started
until
on
they
those,
got
man.
married.
Those purity balls, talk about balls.
And if you search purity culture, just amongst podcasts, I've listened to a number of podcasts, and they're most all women sharing their perspectives. So it's out there. I encourage you to search that if you're interested in that perspective. You could describe our stories in this episode as stunted development sexually. I mean, I could see how you might have that perspective. Just not understanding yourself and what, like, if you were never given permission, whether you're a guy or a girl or whatever, to masturbate, then and you never did, then there's a whole world of yourself that you do not understand, that then you don't, and that's disempowering when you're not in control of your own body and your own pleasure. That when you don't have that autonomy and you don't have that understanding, it's an aspect of personal development that could be stunted, and then you're playing catch up. You know, it's different than being a late bloomer, than being a totally suppressing a natural, beautiful aspect of being human.
Yeah.
And it can have extremely damaging ripple effects in your relationships.
And again, I think the thing that may get missed as we talk about this, just because it's not our experience, is that as you'll see, while there is baggage and there are things that we've dealt with and there are these negative repercussions, in large part, we dodged a lot of the pitfalls of purity culture. That's not an endorsement of it. Again, if you subscribe to thinking of this way, then you could use us in our particular cases as support for your argument. We're not here, that's not what we're doing. We're telling our story. But I think that specifically with what you're talking about right now, with this whole not getting comfortable with your own body, again, is something that the burden falls so heavily on the women in the Christian world, or the conservative evangelical Christian world, because, and again, this may have changed somewhat. I haven't been in that world for a long time now, so I don't know what they're talking to college students about in Crew, for instance. It's been 20 years since they were doing it for us, more than 20 years.
Yeah.
So, but at the time, what was happening is, we're not talking about masturbation, we're not talking about porn with women, and so you've got a bunch of women who, their view of their own sexual empowerment and understanding their own body, they bring it into the marriage, and they're coming into the marriage with this thought of like, oh, my job is to serve and pleasure my husband. The husband is coming into the marriage thinking, my job, I'm the one who's really sex obsessed, and and even the books that are written about it and the talks that are given, it's just like it sets up this dichotomy where the men are the ones who are really horny and want to have sex, and the women are the ones who let the men have sex when they want to, when they're not tired or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And talk about stunting. Think about all the women, we were obviously stunted, but think about the women who have been stunted in not being able or being free to explore their own sexuality. And which is I think even more complex for a woman than it is for a man in some ways. But yet it's like, you said one of the first things you said in episode 1 was you just, out of context, just said female orgasm. But we'll talk about female orgasms in the next episode, but I think that alone—
we may even have one.
But I think that's the perfect example of like, spoiler alert, there was one orgasm on my wedding night, and it wasn't a female one.
All right, you want to come back next episode?
Well, there was more than one actually, but they were all from me.